Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a full agenda today. I know most of you, but for those of you I haven't met, my name is Christy Taylor. I'm the Director of Programs and Employer Partnerships here at the Chamber. I'm excited to have you all for the second webinar in our Employer Upskilling series. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we kick off. We are recording this and you'll receive a recording following the webinar, and we'll also share slides. So if you have colleagues who didn't make it today or that you want to share this with, please feel free to do that. We'll send out the recording just a few days after this presentation. Right now, everyone is on mute, but this is a pretty interactive format and we will stop frequently to take questions. So please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask questions or get clarification when you need it as we go through the presentation. And we'll also have some time at the end for discussion. Today, we are talking about work-based learning as part of this webinar series, which is a big priority for us here at the Chamber. We're starting to scale our own work-based learning programming and supports, and we hope that you find this useful today as you build out your own work-based learning initiatives at your company. Just to note, this webinar series is being offered in conjunction with a comprehensive toolkit that we are building out that will be available to you all soon. And that will go very deep into these topics, talking about how you can better offer education assistance to your workers, how you can strengthen your work-based learning program, and how you can create a general learning culture at your company. So we'll have that available to share with you soon. That'll have templates and resources and a lot of information related to these topics. But today we wanted to take you through a webinar series to talk more about work-based learning. And we are very lucky to have John Kaplan with us, who is helping us develop our toolkit, but who is also leading us through our presentation today. John was the Chief Learning Officer at Discover Financial, where he built an incredibly successful tuition assistance program. He has since left and opened his own consulting firm where he helps other employers and organizations improve and build their own education assistance programs and other initiatives. So I will turn it over to him to do a full introduction and to kick us off here. But thank you, John, for doing this with us this morning, and thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Christy, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. So today we're going to talk about how to get started with work-based learning. And really at the end of this presentation, you should be able to define some of the tools that you have at your disposal when you consider work-based learning, and really how to get started. So how to think about what your objectives are, how to align your objectives with your work-based learning program, how to gain company support, etc. I'm going to start with just a quick introduction of myself. So I've got a 25-year career in learning and talent management. I've got particular expertise in corporate education and work-based learning programs, and I'll talk about some of my own experiences as we go through the presentation. As Christy said, I currently own and operate my own a consulting firm. We focus mostly on upskilling and reskilling initiatives, and work-based learning is a key tool when you start talking about how do you upskill and how do you reskill people. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. My background, I grew up in California. I started my career as a high school teacher in inner city Oakland. I taught at Skyline High. I taught 12th graders in economics and government. I had an opportunity to go start a charter school in the East Bay area, sort of Oakland, Alameda area. And that was going along swimmingly until our main partner, Arthur Anderson, ended up running into sort of a little end run problem. And the school continued to move on, but I realized that they weren't going to invest in it the way I'd hoped, and that the most interesting things were going on in corporate America. I left the public school system and went to Oracle Corporation, a software company. I ended up at Visa after a little while and moved to the Midwest, where I became the Chief Learning Officer at Discover Financial Services until about 2 years ago. I was at Discover for about 11 or 12 years. At Discover, I would say that one of our flagship accomplishments was offering a free college program to all our employees, and as a result of that, I was quoted and interviewed by Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Fortune, CNN, Money. And that actually, at some point, I realized that that I had more opportunity to influence more lives outside of Discover than inside Discover. And I left Discover to start my own consulting firm. And so Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce is one of my most valued clients. I also work with Jobs for the Future, or GFF, Guild Education, Kaplan Education. There's a supply chain management company that I work with quite a bit named Prologis. I work with venture capital companies. One of them is Sterling Partners, but I work with a bunch of different private equity and venture capital companies as private equity and capital looks to what the next big thing is in terms of upskilling and reskilling. So today, we are going to talk about what work-based learning is and what it can do for you. We're going to talk about the types of work-based learning programs. We're going to talk about how do you define your objectives in a really clear way so you can align your work-based learning objectives to what you're trying to achieve and ensure that you have the best chance of success. We're going to talk about how you choose the right type of program. And then finally, we should have some time for questions and answers. And so as we go along the way, you can just interrupt me and just if you just have a question, don't hesitate. Take yourself off mute and just ask me a question. So let's start with just a definition of work-based learning. Work-based learning, it's in the deck, it's called WBL. And so if you see that, that's what it means. It's an education strategy that provides students with real life work experiences where they can apply academic and technical skills to develop their employability and job performance. So that's sort of a textbook definition. The way I think of work-based learning is there's been a lot of learning science done over the years. And the one thing that comes out most clearly in every piece of science is that humans learn when they can see relevance in between the content that they're trying to learn and the different types of programs that they have. So, for example, humans are actually designed more to forget information than to retain information. And if you think about it, if you think about all your senses, your smell, taste, touch, sight, all of those senses, all the data coming into your brain, you would actually you can't retain all that information. So your brain has actually evolved to have a really efficient way at dumping information that isn't relevant, but it's designed to actually hold on to things that are relevant. And if you have a problem and someone teaches you how to solve that problem, that's something you're going to remember forever. So work-based learning is really a way of creating relevance in learning, so that when you encounter new information, you actually can retain it. So there are really sort of a variety of objectives for work-based learning programs. And the way I think about this is that there are programs for non-employees and new hires, and there are programs for transitioning people into new job roles. And the types of objectives you can have, these are just some of the top line objectives that when I work with companies and they talk about, how to build the right work-based learning strategies, these are some of the objectives that I most commonly hear. So developing a more robust talent pipeline is a big one. So they say, look, when we post a job, it can take forever to fill the job. And when we fill it, oftentimes we just have to sort through a bunch of people that aren't even remotely qualified. So gosh, how can we go outside and build a talent pipeline so that when we do have a position, we actually get a better crop of applicants? Another objective is improving the speed to proficiency of new employees. Oftentimes I hear this a lot, and this is actually some of my own experience when I was at Discover, is one of the biggest challenges is just the learning curve was so steep for new employees that they would go through their new hire training program and they would immediately just have struggle on the job. And that actually led to all sorts of things like, attrition, low morale, et cetera. And so one of the objectives of work-based learning programs is to improve that speed to proficiency so people actually get faster and better at the job more quickly. One of the objectives I hear a lot is increased retention rates for new employees. In a lot of companies, you can have first-year attrition rates at 40, 50%. And that often is caused by low speed to proficiency. But oftentimes, there are other things that you can do to improve retention rates. And then finally, oftentimes you can use work-based learnings to build better community relations. I think a lot of companies are in a situation where they have operations in a particular community, and all of their employees drive in from other communities and commute in, and that the community is the community in which the business is located feels like, wait a minute, I guess you're paying taxes, but none of our residents actually benefit very much from the experience of having your business here. The only thing we see is some tax revenue, I guess, but we have a lot of traffic, but we don't actually see our citizens being employed at your company. And so oftentimes work-based learning can help solve that problem. Now, when you're looking at employees who are transitioning into new job roles, these are some of the objectives that I hear the most often. First, reducing the need to staff external applicants and promotional job opportunities. So oftentimes when new positions are posted, there's just no one on staff who can move into that role. And so you go outside and hire someone else. And the problem with that is sort of twofold. One is you pay top dollar for people coming outside the company. And so people coming outside the company they're more expensive. Second is that there's a higher risk because you don't know whether or not they're going to be a cultural fit. And I guess the third problem with that is that you end up having low morale. So if you're working at the company for a long time and you just keep on seeing promotional opportunities going to people outside the company, you end up feeling a little bit jaded, perhaps. Another objective is to improve the speed to proficiency of transitioning employees. So if you're moving from one job role to another job role, maybe that's a big jump. And oftentimes you have the same problem with existing employees that you have with new employees, that moving from job role to job role is a huge problem. And then last, how can you improve employee engagement? And I think solid work-based learning has the promise of doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some work-based learning experiences and categorize them into different types of programs. And just credit given to where credit is due. A lot of this work was done by a nonprofit, a national nonprofit called JFF. You may have heard them as Jobs for the Future. I think they've done just fabulous work in the work-based learning space. And so they have awesome resources. It's a great opportunity. If you have an opportunity to go there and check out the resources, they have toolkits. They've got a bunch of wonderful things. So let's talk about the different types of programs. So first, there are career experience programs, and career experience programs are really about developing job-specific skills. And so apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job rotations, these are three types of career experience programs that have a lot of success. Now, on-the-job training, I'll start with on-the-job training, because typically what on-the-job training is, it's a combination of some sort of formalized learning experience plus experiences doing the job that you're learning to do at the same time. And these programs can be great in building relevance, because everything you learn, it's really clear how to apply it, and it's clear how relevant that content is, because it helps you out the very next day. If you learn something in a classroom or an online and you get to apply it the very next day, that sort of primes your brain for learning. Apprenticeships are similar to on-the-job training. There are a couple of additional things that apprenticeships have. Apprenticeships typically have a bunch of different elements. It has formalized learning, on-the-job experiences. Apprenticeships are usually really have to be paid. So they're typically, apprenticeships are for people outside your company that you can bring into your company. You pay them while they're learning in a combination of classroom and on the job training experiences. At the end of the apprenticeship, they'll have a credential. And that credential hopefully is something that allows them to move from company to company. And there's also the promise of full-time employment. So often apprenticeships, there's a stipend or there's some sort of money to make sure that people can devote the time and attention to the work. But then once they graduate, they get a full-time job. Job rotations, some companies use them where actually they rotate people through a bunch of jobs so they can build the expertise in a variety of areas in the company. And the nice thing about this is it prepares people for promotional opportunities, but it also allows them to develop greater context. And you can actually drive down error rates, all different problems associated with with complex operations when people actually know how to do different jobs in the company. So. All right, so there are two. Let's go on two additional types of programs: career exposure programs and career engagement programs. And these really are about growing career interest and fostering employability skills. So when we talk about career exposure programs, job shadows and mentoring are two that come to mind immediately. This is really around growing career interests. Gosh, how do we, oftentimes you're in a company, you have all these people, and they actually just don't know what career opportunities there are, and they don't know how to position themselves for those career opportunities. Job shadows are a great way of doing that. Just have someone shadow someone in a job for a day or two, and then they get a sense, oh, that I understand what that job does now, and then they can sort of position themselves. They can learn the right information. They can be incredibly helpful. Mentorships are another way of developing all of that as well, and so there are a lot of companies that have mentorship programs really to build that career interest. Career engagement programs, I'm talking internships and pre-internships, are really about developing employability skills. Oftentimes you have a talent pool, you have a group of people who are in your community, and they just don't have the basic employability skills. Oftentimes you can engage them for summer internship programs, or put them through a pre-apprenticeship program, which looks a lot like an internship, but maybe it receives a stipend as well. And those can develop those employability skills. Oftentimes what these are ladders that actually allow people to position themselves so they can get an apprenticeship when at some future point in time. The last set of work-based learning programs we call career exploration programs. This is really about building career awareness. So oftentimes when you work in a community, people just know your company as a big building somewhere. They don't even know what you do. And so career fairs, industry projects, mock interviews, these are all ways in which you can build that awareness of what careers could be like in your industry. Now, the way to think about who these are targeted for is they're sort of specific audiences. That really down at the bottom, the career exploration programs are almost entirely for potential future employees. And up at the top, the career experience programs are really for existing and maybe pre-hire employees, but employees that you either are working for you, are going to be working for you. And career exposure programs and career engagement programs are really, can be for a combination, or you can focus them either towards existing employees or potentially future employees. So that's the way to sort of think about the landscape of different opportunities for work-based learning. And so let's talk about moving from here is like, okay, now I know what all these programs, like, how do I even get started? And I'm working from the assumption that none of us have full autonomy to just implement anything we want. We work in an environment in which there are many stakeholders that we report to someone, and that person has a bunch of peers probably that weigh in on what they would like to see from us. And so this is my experience as being chief learning officer. I reported to the chief HR officer, who reported to the CEO. And I had a lot of great ideas, but I didn't have full autonomy to do anything. And so, my job was entirely based on how I can persuade all the stakeholders in my company of the benefits of various different types of programs. So, that was sort of my approach. I would assume that's very similar to everyone here. And what I would recommend just to start with is like defining your objectives as clearly as possible is going to help you invest in the right programs, and also help ensure that that people have expectations that are realistic and that are aligned with what you're trying to achieve. There's nothing worse than rolling out a program where everyone has different expectations and different ambitions for your program, and your program may be very successful, but you disappoint everyone because they were looking for something else. So let's give you a couple examples. Let's say, for example, your goal is to foster improved community relations. That's your head of corporate communications comes and talks to you and says, we have a community problem here. It's just, we keep on getting these negative comments from people in the community, and we really need to show that we're an engaged community members. Well, in that case, that these career exploration programs and career engagement programs are the two type of programs that have the most promise to delivering improved community relations. If, on the other hand, you need to reduce the need to staff external applicants in promotional job opportunities, then you're looking at a totally different set of work-based learning programs. You're looking at career experience programs such as internships, on the job training, job job rotations, job shadows, mentorships. Those are the type of programs that you want. So the more you can define your objectives, the more you can invest in the right programs. And honestly, if you have people coming from all different perspectives, they're trying to achieve different things, and you roll out, say, a mentorship program, a mentorship program can solve very specific challenges, but will not solve other challenges. And so getting alignment on that is really important. So in terms of getting alignment, really identifying and prioritizing your objectives really should be your first order of business. And I'm going to walk you through sort of my mindset about how I do this when I work with companies. And I either do it when I've been an employee at a company. This is essentially the approach I used. As a consultant, when you come in, very, very similar. I mean, you're just trying to gain alignment across a whole lot of different stakeholders, all that see the world very differently and have probably different interests. And so here are the 4 things that I always try to do. I try to understand who the stakeholders are and engage with the stakeholders and spend some time talking to them to see if I can understand their worlds. The second thing is I ask them to rank their objectives, because all different stakeholders in big companies have different objectives. I try to make sure the trade-offs are really clear and try to make sure that everyone understands that no one program is going to achieve everything that everyone wants to achieve. And then I try to confirm priorities. And I'll show you how I do this. One of the very first things I do is I will meet with a bunch of stakeholders, and I'll get them to rank order their preferences. And so, let's just call them objective 1 through objective 9. So I will meet with a bunch of stakeholders, get them to talk about their objectives. So when you're talking to, for example, if you have a head of operations oftentimes their biggest challenge is attrition. And because they're trying to keep the production line moving, and oftentimes whenever you lose someone, that slows down your throughput. And so attrition is honestly, always one of their biggest challenges. If you're dealing with the head of corporate communications, they're probably most interested in community relations. And so everyone's going to have slightly different objectives. If you can get all those objectives out on a piece of paper and send out a quick survey and ask people to rank their objectives, then you actually have some data to work with, and you can share that back with people and say, hey, look, we did a quick survey. We can't achieve everything we want. Objective 1 looks like it has the most need. Like this one had people ranking it the highest. The other ones that have a lot of interest: objective 2, objective 6, objective 8, and 9. So let's just all agree we're not going to do objective 4. We're not going to work on objective 3. Our solution set, or the objectives to which we're going to try and find solutions, are primarily number 1. And if we can get some spillover benefits in some other objectives, specifically objective 2, objective 8, objective 9, that would be great. But really our focus is going to be on solving objective number 1. So that's a really important conversation to have with people, and make sure that they understand what you're trying to do and what you're actually going to say, this is not part of our priorities. So the last thing I always try to do is make sure the trade-offs are clear. And this is the type of thing that I'll do as a trade-off matrix. And so what I can do is just list all the objectives down and list the different types of tools that I have in the toolkit, and sort of show people, like, look, the things that we're going to roll out, like if we really want objective 1, career fairs are really going to be the things that do it. It's designed for that. And objective 2, 3, 4, we can get some of those things as well. But on the other hand, if we're really trying to if we're really trying to achieve objective 3, 4, or 5, mock interviews are the way to go. It's, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to have an awareness, so that when you roll out an incredibly successful career fair, or if you roll out an incredibly successful internship program, that people aren't coming to you and saying, hey, my speed to proficiency is still low. Well, that wasn't one of the objectives we were trying to solve. We agreed that objective 1 was what we're trying to do, and we're rolling out a program, and here's some data to show that we're actually achieving our objectives. So I'm just going to stop there. I've been talking for a long time. See if there are any questions.
Something came through in the chat. Can you explain the color meaning again? I'm assuming this is on the trade-off matrix.
Yeah.
Can you just explain Can you just explain that a little more?
Yeah. So the way I think about this is just like a stoplight. green, yellow, red. There's that some things, and it basically, it doesn't, this is just one way of doing it. And I think the idea is to be able to explain just in very simple terms, like career fairs are good for some things and not good for other things. And so recognize that when we roll out, if we roll out career fairs, it's really good at objective 1, really good at objective 7 and 8, really not good for objective 6. Maybe we'll get a little bit of benefit on objective 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it's just a simple way of sort of, stoplight, this is what you want to use these programs for, but not for these other things. Does that help explain?
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
Good. What are the questions?
John, those objectives, when you're referring to those are some of those things that you were talking to earlier, yes. Right? Attracting talent, retention.
Yeah, exactly. If you can get people, I mean, I could have spent time, but I think the thing is I could have spent time and gotten a little more specific on these, but I think the objectives are going to be really contextual to your work environment. And so getting those, I don't think you should use anything that I'm presenting, these things, and just sort of copy them and use them with your own stakeholders. I think this is sort of a way of thinking about it. And I think the takeaways here are, get your stakeholders to define all the realm of possible objectives, get them to rank order them, and get them to understand the trade-offs. Those are the sort of the 3 things you want to do. Once you understand that, make sure you confirm your priorities. Hey, just to be clear, we agreed that we're really going to try to improve our community relations. And once that happens, it just makes it much more likely that what you'll get is, if you're not solving your head of operations problem with attrition, you'll get indifference from him as opposed to outright hostility when you're not solving his problems. And so, but at the same time, you'll be able to promote the successes you have in community relations, and it'll be much more clearly understood what you were trying to achieve and what you actually have achieved. Make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. All right.
I'm sorry, I have one more clarifying question. What are some of the reasons? Could you just talk through, like, if you rank an objective red, is it cost? Is it that particular intervention just doesn't solve for that thing that you're trying? Like, what are some of the reasons that things don't align?
Yeah, so think about it this way. It's that not that the objective isn't right, it's that the work-based learning strategy isn't right for that objective. Okay, so it's not necessarily about cost, and we're going to talk about cost. We're going to talk about how to help people understand when you narrow down your different solutions. The key thing here is, like, hey, career fairs are not good for everything. Okay, they're not going to solve every problem. We got 8 different objectives here. It's really good at only solving 3 of the problems. All right. And mock interviews are good at solving 3 different problems. So it's really about understanding the trade-offs that you're making. If we choose career fairs, we're not choosing mentoring. And not choosing mentoring means that we're probably not going to achieve, these particular objectives. And it's sort of to just get people understand what things they're good at and what they're not good at. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's after defining the objectives, choosing that right work-based learning program, everyone sort of understands the trade-offs. What I like to think about is like, how can we help people understand the costs of a program relative to the benefits that we may get? And there's this, maybe you've seen these effort impact grids, but an effort impact grid is a way to plot different types of strategies towards what you may achieve. And this is another way of, you can use it to show trade-offs, but it's actually really helpful at helping people understand how to invest in various efforts. So let's say, for example, on this objective 1, if we're going to solve, we've all agreed objective 1 is what we're going to solve. And let's give a name to it. Let's just say that this is speed to proficiency. The head of operations has said this is most important. People have agreed. Speed to proficiency it is. Well, there are a few things that can really do this. High effort, high impact on the job training probably has pretty good trade-off. It's a lot of effort, but it has a really big impact. Okay, apprenticeships have more effort and not quite as much of an impact, but still pretty good. Career fairs, maybe they have effort and maybe they have some benefit in the long run, but they're low effort. So this is a way to help people understand, like, here's sort of the type of things that we could do. If you guys don't want to put a lot of resources into it, think of things that are farther down on the sort of lower on the vertical axis. But we should be thinking of things that have a high impact that are over to the right. You could just do multiple of these and say, hey, objective 2, it has sort of a different constellation of effort impact plottings. So this is another way of just showing some data to your stakeholders and getting people to agree. And if you say, look, our job, like, we think actually the best thing to do right now, I'm not really resourced for all of these things. So I think that the one we should do is we're going to do job shadows. It's not as effective as on the job training or apprenticeships, but it's a lot less effort. And just given the way I'm staffed right now, I don't think I have resources to do anything above job shadows. Oftentimes what happens is when you present this to your stakeholders, they can come back to you and say, look, I hear what you're saying. I want something that has high impact. I'm going to devote 4/10 of an FTE to help you on this, so that I'm going to try and take the effort out of the equation, and you just focus on the things that have the highest impact. This actually is a really helpful thing to help people understand where you're focused from, what you have staffing to solve and what you don't have staffing to solve. And so you're going to have to make trade-offs, like, maybe we want something that has lower effort, but also has maybe lower impact. But then people can weigh in and say, hey, we'd like you to solve a bigger issue, and we'll give you the resourcing to do it. All right, let's just give one example. Let's say we're looking at work-based learning strategies to build external talent pools. And I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, if we're having trouble with external talent pools, that's what we've heard. We've heard we want to be able to hire people more readily from the locations that we hire from already. The questions to ask is there a skill deficit? Is the problem that we're going out and we're trying to hire people, but they just don't have the skills? Or is there an awareness or interest deficit that, we post jobs on the job boards of, like, the local community college, and no one applies? So oftentimes maybe this is something like, you need engineering talent. And so asking that question, is it that we hire engineers, but engineers don't come with the job specific skills that we need? Or is that we think there are people out there with the job specific skills, but they're just not interested in applying? So let's take the left hand column, and how would we walk through this? So first of all, the thing you need to do is really define the skills and capabilities you need. So if you're trying to build external talent pools, and you think there's a skill deficit problem, you're going to have to sit down with the hiring managers and say, all right, what are the skills and capabilities you need? Oftentimes that's not listed, believe it or not. I found many times where, when you sit down, you say, hey, what is the big skill deficit that you are encountering? People will tell you what that is, and you look at the job description, and it's like not in the job description. It's like, okay, well, that might be part of the problem, right? Maybe you need to define it a little bit better. But oftentimes just talking to your stakeholders and getting a sense of that will help you a lot. Then the question is, where are we hiring? Where are the existing talent pools? Are we hiring from the local community colleges? Are we hiring from the local university? And then it's determine the skill gaps. Okay, so the skill gaps is really critical. It's like, these are the needed skills, these are the existing talent pools, and we've got these skill gap problems. Once you do that, then you can start thinking about the methods for closing those gaps. And I would say these career experience programs, apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job rotations, if you're hiring from internally, those are 3 different types of programs that can be super helpful. I think if you can also do internships and pre-apprenticeships. If you're really talking about basic employability skills, you can do internships and pre-apprenticeships. But remember, internships and pre-apprenticeships will have a much longer lead time. That you're probably going to be investing in high school students for these kind of programs, and it may be 4 to 6 years before you actually can hire them in any positions that you have posted. But it's not to say that you don't want to do that. Sometimes you have, let's do something for the immediate. Let's invest in something that's going to pay off in several years. Maybe there's an awareness problem, and so if there's an awareness problem, the first thing you really need to do is let's talk about the employee value proposition. Why would someone want to come work for us? Oftentimes, companies haven't really well defined their employee value proposition. They think about, well, we pay people. Well, I mean, that that's great. Most other companies do pay their employees. The question is, why would they choose your paycheck over someone else's paycheck? And there may be things about your culture. There may be things about your mission. There may be things that will actually make your positions more appealing. Um, Once you do that, then you can define the target audience. Once you've defined the target audience, you can sort of determine what are the methods to build awareness and interest. And the work-based learning programs that are best on this are these career exploration programs, career fairs, where either you participate in a community college or local college by setting up a booth and trying to promote what your company stands for from an employee perspective. Industry projects. There are a lot of companies that actually partner with STEM programs, for example, in high schools and community colleges and universities. They give people an opportunity to do projects that are relevant to the industry. And so they actually get to see the type of work that goes on. Mock interviews are another thing. I don't think this is as common, but oftentimes what you can do is take high school students, run them through a series of mock interviews so they see the types of questions that they're going to be asked, and you can have a conversation about how they build the necessary skills. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through just some examples that I've seen throughout the I'd say probably the past 5 years of companies that are doing really interesting work. Programs to close a skill gap. The main type of programs there are apprenticeships, educational partnerships, and mentorships. Lockheed Martin they've got, gosh, they probably have somewhere between 40 and 80 different apprenticeship programs. And what they realized is that they had all these on-the-job training programs, and the problem is that they were having trouble getting people into those positions because there was just a really steep learning curve, and the jobs were very, very technical in nature. And so what they did is they realized they had these on-the-job training programs, and they just wanted to increase the size of the talent pool. And by doing that, they created these registered apprenticeships, and the apprenticeships were basically, they got funding from the federal government. I don't know if any of you, if your companies participate in the H-1B program, but if you have H-1B1 employees, you actually have to pay a fee to the federal government. The federal government actually repurposes that to fund apprenticeships to help Americans, develop the skills that currently we can't find Americans for. And so Lockheed Martin has used that money to build out full apprenticeship programs where employees are paid, they're not full employees yet. They come as apprentices. Their apprenticeships can be from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months, and they get a paycheck, and at the end of it, they get a certificate, and they get full employment. The wonderful company is an agricultural company in the Central Valley of California. One thing they realize is they have the Central Valley is a regionally depressed area in California. They have last I saw, actually before the pandemic, their unemployment rate was about 37%. And they had actually job for high skilled agricultural engineers that were posted, and still they had this unemployment rate, and they realized that they just didn't have the skills and abilities coming into the company from local high schools. And they started this really wonderful program that is a partnership with local school districts, where where young students as young as ninth grade enter into an academy, the Wonderful Company Academy, and they end up learning to be agricultural technicians. And by the end of the program, they actually have either an associate's degree, or they're 1 semester away from an associate's degree, and they have job opportunities with the Wonderful Company. So they learn all these great skills. John Deere had a similar issue with their certified maintenance technicians. One of the things about John Deere is they sell incredibly complicated machinery, and they actually need to have a wide network of repair technicians. And one of the things they realized is that they just weren't getting enough people into community college programs that were designed to help people be John Deere maintenance technicians. And so they built an apprenticeship program, and the apprenticeship program is offered through a set of community colleges. You're paid while you're in the apprenticeship program. You learn John Deere technology, and when you graduate, you get the John Deere certificate. This actually allows you to go work for any maintenance any maintenance company doing work on John Deere. And so they created this great talent pool, and they ensured that they had more people working on maintenance, which helps the company in the long run. Now, if you're interested in closing, sort of closing an interest or awareness gap, some of the examples: career fairs, industry projects with local colleges, company tours. There are a ton of job fairs in the Detroit area. I mean, if you just search job fairs Detroit, there are a lot of different job fairs going on. In terms of industry projects, Lansing Community College has some really interesting programs. They have youth-oriented programs. They partner with local companies. These are all the things that they're thinking. Companies that are working with Lansing Community College are thinking 10 to 15 years out, because they're thinking about, who are the fourth and fifth graders that may end up working for us. And those are the things that can create interest in people, that they will develop the skills and abilities when they want to come in and eventually work with these companies. So I'm going to stop and see what questions you have on these.
I have a couple from the chat that came in. The first, given that, we're in COVID times and in-person instruction is not always possible for things like apprenticeships and just a lot of work-based learning initiatives in general, how is technology and how is virtual learning sort of replacing some of this or complementing it? How are companies transitioning? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think companies are transitioning all of these work-based learning programs, the same way they're transitioning work. And so for some job roles, you can do that entirely virtually. For other job roles, you actually have to work through social distancing and make sure that people, are safe in their environment. I'll give you an example that at Discover, they basically came to the conclusion, it must have been in March it must have been about a year ago, that they were basically going to transition everything to entirely virtual. And they have 7,000 people in their call centers, sent them all home. And they got them set up with the technology. They had lines set up that you drive through in your car. You get your computer, you get your monitor, you get your headset, and set it up at home. And then all of the work-based learning we did at Discover became 100% virtual. And I'll go through sort of how that looks. But yeah, I mean, it's not ideal. It's great to be able to see people face to face, but it's no more of a challenge than just getting normal work done that every company faces.
Thank you, John. And then one more question in the chat. Do you have templates or resources or case studies around creating these partnerships with education providers, especially community colleges? Like, how does an employer go about building that really strong partnership with the education institutions to run these programs and get participants?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is there are some national nonprofits that have a lot of these tools. I mean, I've developed some myself over the time, but like if you're really interested in just plug and play content, JFF is a great place to go. Also, most universities recognize that this is just part and parcel of being of preparing people in their community for jobs in their community. And so most community colleges, most universities have thought this through and can work with local communities that are interested. And I've seen cases where companies have gone to the university and say, we actually don't really know what we need, but we think we need to partner with you because of this problem, that problem, that problem. And they actually have dedicated personnel who can help you build out some of these programs.
Maybe as part of the follow-up, we can link to some of those resources.
That'd be great.
Share some more information. Thank you, John.
All right, so let's give another example. Let's say, for example, your work-based learning strategy, you're looking to improve speed to proficiency. So I think, the first question you have to ask is, well, what's getting in the way of speed to proficiency? And here are a couple possibilities. Maybe it's job complexity, that you have super complex jobs. And that's, I think, one of the things that Lockheed Martin had faced. I'll talk to you about Discover a little bit and explain to you sort of how we solved that problem. Another is poor onboarding program. It could be that you've just, for the complexity of the jobs, you really just don't have the level of focus and the level of investment in onboarding programs that you really need. So some of the things you can do, these career experience programs can be great. Apprenticeships, on-the-job training, job rotations, these are all things that can help. Now, what happens if it's a little bit different? What happens if your challenge is unclear hiring guidelines? Okay, so you're hiring people that may not be a great fit for the jobs. What about if you really have a poor candidate vetting process? I know I've seen a lot of companies with that where they have a lot of interviews, but it's actually not clear who the decision maker is, and maybe the interviews aren't structured in a way to get at the critical skills needed. Or maybe it's just really ineffective coaching and development that happens when the manager. Here's what I tell you. Don't waste your time on improving learning programs. Really focus on improving the talent management and the talent acquisition processes. So work-based learning isn't going to solve everything. And if you have unclear hiring guidelines, it's probably not a learning issue. Now, maybe there's a learning issue as well, but you're actually not going to be able to solve the learning issue until you actually solve the hiring issue. So make sure that your hiring is focused, that you've got people who are as close as possible, and then you can start working on the learning programs. And I'd say that that's actually a really common thing that in a lot of companies you'll have the leaders, the executive vice president, senior vice president say, I want a learning program. And one of the hardest conversations to have with them is when you have to tell them as the head of learning, it's not a learning problem you're facing here. The problem actually is that you're not clear enough with what skills you're trying to hire for. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a learning problem down the road, but let's sort out our hiring guidelines first. Let's sort out our interview and our pre-hire assessment process before we actually focus on learning. We can cover a lot of the gaps with just improving our talent management processes. All right, so let me give you an example. I promised you I'd give you an example from the financial services industry, and this was a program that I worked really hard on for many years. It actually delivered great results. I'll talk to you about some of the results. But by way of background, call center work in most financial services companies requires agents to respond immediately to customer questions across a wide variety of complex financial service products. And I think when we counted up the number of questions, there were thousands of questions that people got. And onboarding programs can be really costly to the company and can be overwhelming to the learner. So say, for example, you're a call center agent in a financial services company and someone's calling with questions about their credit card statement. Credit cards are actually pretty complex financial products. When you talk about how interest rates are calculated, I mean, those are really complicated questions, and the number of questions are enormous. And so when I arrived at Discover, we had this program that was classroom-based training for 6 weeks and then full-time work. And so as a new employee, you came in, you sat in a classroom, and you just learned from online or textbook materials. You just flip through, read. You'd have an instructor there, and then all of a sudden one day someone said, "Congratulations, you've graduated." They gave you a headset, and you marched out on the floor, and all of a sudden you had to apply all that information. Well, needless to say, it wasn't a particularly effective learning program for a bunch of different reasons. One of which was that the relevancy of the content wasn't clear, and so people would learn all this stuff and they didn't really understand. They couldn't really put themselves in the position of having to answer these questions in real time. So the retention was actually pretty low. Another thing that we realized is that people had just high levels of anxiety when they were going in between classroom training and full-time work, is that they spent 6 weeks just imagining what it would be like. And the day they got their headset, we had people just who walked out of the building, just said, this is just too much. I'm just too stressed over this. What we did is we broke out the classroom training and an on-the-job training portion, and basically created 6 one week sessions. Basically 3 or 4 days in classroom and then 1 or 2 days on the phone. And what we were able to do is we were able to segment the calls. So you could practice on week 1. The easiest call to get is an address change. Someone calls you up and say, "Hey, I moved. I need you to update my address." Super simple to do. Okay, great. Just get the information, know where to go in the system, change it, and say thank you, and off you go. And so what we did is we created a program. We aligned our program with our with the actual work. So when people came in, they're prompted, "Do you want to change your address?" If they did, they went to a person who had been just hired that week, and it just was all of a sudden we said we got people successful in the first week of training, and then we can move on to a more complicated call and another more complicated call and give people experiences. This also allowed us to give better data to the operations group, the vice presidents who actually ran these groups. We could say, hey, here's the class of people that we're graduating. We're graduating 100 people in another 3 weeks. Here's how they're performing, and we had actual data on how they are performing along the way. We could actually hold people back if they weren't succeeding. So here's what we saw: before we saw poor early job performance, is that people just, they couldn't retain all the information because they didn't have a chance to practice it. We had super high attrition. People would either leave before they started on the phones, or they basically get on the phones, they'd have 2 days of bad work and they'd quit. And they had low engagement. I mean, it just wasn't fun. After this, and you'll recognize this table over on the right, this is the table of all the different objectives that work-based learning can get you. We didn't develop a more robust pipeline. We didn't foster better community relations. We didn't reduce the need to staff promotional opportunities from outside the company. But we did improve speed to proficiency. We improved retention rates. We improved speed to proficiency when we transition employees. It was actually better for transitioning employees as well. And we improved employee engagement. So that was a good example of a work-based learning program that they paired classroom training or formal instruction with opportunities on the job. And that we actually we every year there's a call center week, which is held in Vegas. It's a global celebration of all call centers, and it's if you're interested in call centers, Vegas, the call center week in Vegas is where everyone goes. I think there are like 30,000 people who descend on Vegas to talk about call center stuff. In 2013, 14, and 15, Discover won Best Onboarding Training Program of all globally of all call centers who participated in this. And actually, after 2015, they changed the bylaws and they said, if you've won 3 years in a row, you can't apply anymore. You can't apply for 5 years or 10 years or something. So they actually threw us out of the competition because our onboarding program was so successful. Another thing that we saw is all the financial service programs, or all the financial services companies that were in the same regions where we operated call centers: Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Columbus, Ohio, Newcastle, Delaware. They basically decided, it's easier to go hire people from Discover than it is to build our onboarding program. So we actually had to worry about people poaching our talent. So a few final thoughts. Number one, really start by understanding your objectives. It really begins there. And to the extent that you define your objectives really clearly and you make sure that all your stakeholders understand those objectives, you're going to be set up for success. Second, choose a work-based learning strategy that's really tailored towards your need. Like if you're trying to improve speed to proficiency, don't worry about going out into high schools and doing career fairs. I mean, that's not going to help you on your speed to proficiency. It may help you with other things, but make sure that you're choosing the right WBL strategy. And finally, research and copy the companies with successful programs. There are a lot of them out there. As Christy said, we're going to try and get you some additional information that you can look at and say, okay, these are some good companies. One thing that's, we can give you all the materials you want, but if you just Google, established apprenticeship programs, you'll get a whole bunch of examples. I mean, Google is an amazing search tool, and you'll get a bunch of different options. So, all right, so we've come to the end. We have about 5 minutes for questions. What questions do we have?
John, I just want to make a comment. This is
Yes.
Marielle.
Hi, Marielle.
This is great stuff. I couldn't keep up. I am absolutely.
I talked too fast.
No. It's good. It's incredible information, and I really loved just breaking down like the skills deficit, and then like what is the best platform of objectives. But I was absolutely blown away by the training program because I guess I haven't seen that any of the companies that I've worked for, and you're absolutely right, like there's such low morale and drop off, and you just get bombarded with the training that you just you're not retaining the information. I went through a program at a particular retail store, and it was just not retail, it was a retail company, but it was just too much information, and I totally forgot some of the things that I learned. And obviously I no longer work there, but that was a while ago. So
So what I'd say is one of the key things that you have to establish to make any of this work is you have to have really good partnerships with the business. So say for example, you're in the retail environment. Typically what ends up happening is you have corporate training programs, and then people go out to different sites, right? To the extent that you can work with those sites and get them to help and participate in the training program, you'll be set up for success. And we were really lucky that what we had is, and Discover is a complicated company because they have 5 or 6 different product lines and vice presidents who run those different things. They all operate very differently. What we were able to do is find the 2 or 3 business lines that were really keen on partnering with us. We built amazing training programs, and pretty soon we had all the other business lines coming to us and saying, hey, can you do what you did for them for us? And so, success is the best antidote to sort of that fragmented environment. To the extent that you can find some places to make it work, you'll get a lot of devotees who will come back, and they'll try and work with you. What other questions do we have?
John, this is Greg from the Chamber. Any just input on what to look for in an education partner, be it a university or a community college, to develop some kind of a partnership for kind of feeding the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I would look for 2 separate things. First, some universities and some colleges are they've just been working with businesses and local organizations longer than others. And so look for that experience. The second thing I think you want is look for the places in which that have established brands with your employees or potential employees. It really helps a lot if there's a sense of trust that a local community college has built with the community. And so oftentimes, if you try and bring in another educational institution that doesn't have the same level of trust, it's harder. It's not to say it's impossible, but I would say that most community colleges will have a department of corporate outreach or something like that you can start working with. And I think community college historically have been very difficult to work with just because they're fragmented institutions. But I think there's a broad recognition that they need to get better at working with local companies. And I think most community colleges have started to do it over the past 10 years.
Thanks, John.
Sure. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. So one last thing for more information, DetroitChamber.com. Christy, would you like to any parting comments for all of us?
Yes, thank you so much, John. This was wonderful once again, and we are looking forward to the next one on Tuesday, March 23rd. If it's not on your calendar, reach out to me. I can get you the call-in information, but on that webinar, we'll be talking about just building a learning culture in general. So I think it'll be a nice cap to this 3-part series, and we're looking forward to having you on that. And like John mentioned, we'll send a follow-up email with the recording and the slides, and we'll also try to pull together some resources and templates to talk about some of the specific things that folks were asking about today. So we'll get you that very soon. In the meantime, mark your calendar for March 23rd. And thank you all once again for your time this morning. It was great having you. Great discussion. And thank you to John.
Hey, thank you very much. This was fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
thank you.